Hello, everyone. Welcome to A Good Night for a Murder, a Victorian true crime podcast. My name is Kim, and tonight's case was a listener request, which I'm so glad was sent in because I'd been aware of it at some point, but forgotten all about it. I find the subject of this case particularly curious because I'm pretty sure you'll form an opinion about her pretty early on in the story, but if you wait until the end, there's a bit of a twist. This is the story of starvation doctor Linda Hazzard. But first, a Victorian Society tip. The medical treatment administered by so-called Dr. Linda Hazzard that we'll learn about tonight was questionable even in the Victorian era. But that got me thinking about all of the scientifically backed Victorian era medical practices recommended by professionals that would shock and appall us today. So I decided to look some of it up to tell you about. For this, I turned to Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, published in 1861. Isabella Beeton was a real person, and her Book of Household Management provided detailed instructions to housewives on how to run a proper Victorian home. In the preface, she wrote, "What moved me in the first instance to attempt a work like this was the discomfort and suffering which I had seen brought upon men and women by household mismanagement. I have always thought that there is no more fruitful source of family discontent than a housewife's badly cooked dinners and untidy ways. Men are so now well served out of doors, at their clubs, well-ordered taverns, and dining houses, that in order to compete with the attractions of these places, a mistress must be thoroughly acquainted with the theory and practice of cookery, as well as perfectly conversant with all the other arts of making and keeping a comfortable home." Needless to say that Mrs. Beeton's work would be received very differently today than it was back then, but to set the bar for where we're at in 1861 so far as home remedy and first aid advice, know that her book regularly mentions bleeding as treatment, including instructions for how to do so at home, applying leeches, and things like rubbing the spine with brandy. Also, with just Mrs. Beeton's book as my source, it looks like in 1861, we are in the time period after the smallpox vaccine has come along, which she recommended, by the way, but before the development of a measles vaccine. There is also zero mention of antibiotics, so we can assume that they were not widely available. First things first, let's talk about stocking your Victorian medicine cabinet. Something called calomel was mentioned very often for a variety of ailments, and I couldn't imagine what this might be that it would be applied so widely. Imagine my surprise when I learned it's mercury. That's right, mercury chloride, which was thankfully phased out due to the high rate of mercury poisoning it caused in patients. Something called Goulard lotion was also mentioned often for treating any sort of skin irritant, including eye irritation. This is a solution of lead acetate. The frequent use of this contributed to how we learned about lead poisoning. The Victorians were also big on purging the body either via laxatives or emetics. For this, they used senna or antimony wine or powder. With a medicine cabinet like that, it was also necessary to include a table of poisons and their remedies. Many of the poisons listed were in fact the aforementioned treatments. Some more mild treatments included applying a poultice. Victorians loved a poultice. For example, things like linseed, which is flax, and mustard would be ground into a poultice and applied externally, which is nowhere near as dangerous as ingesting mercury, but it's not going to help with scarlet fever, which we know today is caused by strep and requires treatment by antibiotic. Also, if you were sick in the Victorian era, get in the bath. A hot bath, a cold bath, lukewarm bath. They were constantly drawing baths, which without indoor plumbing and hot water heaters was a lot of work. I mean, a bath can be nice when you're sick, but these weren't always the relaxing variety and probably just depleted the patient's energy more than anything. I want to move on to some of the advice in Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management because I think it's interesting how they were so accurate in some of their recommendations, but also so far off at the same time. One example of this is teething in babies, where the book states, "The treatment in all cases of painful teething is remarkably simple and consists in keeping the body cool by mild aperient medicines, allaying the irritation in the gums by friction with a rough ivory ring or stale crust of bread, and when the head, lungs, or any organ is overloaded or unduly excited to use the hot bath, and by throwing the body into a perspiration, equalize the circulation and relieve the system from the danger of a fatal termination." Some of this, like giving the baby something to bite on, is very familiar advice. But what fatal termination from teething could they be referring to? Well, they seem to think rickets and water on the head, or what we'd call hydrocephalus, was caused by teething and would lance or cut the baby's gums to try and treat it. I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty certain that getting teeth to pop through quicker has nothing to do with rickets, that's a vitamin deficiency, and nothing to do with hydrocephalus either. In another example of what Victorians got wrong and what they got right, I want to talk about what the Victorians meant when they talk about having fits. I feel like fits comes up a lot in media portrayal of the Victorian era quite often, so let's see what they're really talking about. First, fits in Mrs. Beeton's book of Household Management from 1861 is a rather lengthy section. It starts by addressing apoplexy, which is often listed as a cause of death on Victorian-era death certificates. Apoplexy actually meant a stroke. And Mrs. Beeton divided them into the strong kind and the weak kind, with the difference being the severity of symptoms. The book goes on to cover epilepsy, also called falling sickness. It does seem like they did delineate this as its own thing, separate from having a stroke, and it does indeed sound like what we refer to today as an epileptic seizure. There was also fainting fits, which just described fainting for any number of reasons. And there is also, and remember this is from 1861, a section dedicated to hysterics. But how do we know what kind of fit to treat? Well, Mrs. Beeton has outlined that for us. Quoting directly now, distinctions between apoplexy and epilepsy. Apoplexy mostly happens in people over 30, whereas epilepsy generally occurs under that age, at any rate for the first time. A person who has epileptic fits over 30 has generally suffered from them for some years. Again, in apoplexy, the body is paralyzed and, therefore, has not the convulsions that take place in epilepsy. The peculiar snoring will also distinguish apoplexy from epilepsy. The book goes on, distinction between apoplexy and hysterics. Hysterics mostly happen in young, nervous, unmarried women and are attended with convulsions, sobbing, laughter, throwing about of the body. Mrs. Beeton's book of Household Management also covers broken bones, burns and scalds, concussions, cholera and autumnal complaints, which I think means the stomach virus, colds, chest colds, styes and inflamed eyelids, liver complaints, heart palpitations, ringworm, drowning, toothaches, warts, wounds, back pain, and more. It even gives instructions for what they called artificial breathing, or what we'd call CPR in relevant cases. If you're interested, you can 100% purchase Mrs. Beeton's book of Household Management on Amazon in Kindle softcover or hardcover. And I wonder what Mrs. Isabella Beeton would have thought of that concept over 160 years ago. A Good Night for a Murder is a true crime podcast that does cover stories including death, violence, sexual assault, and other adult themes. Please take care while listening. Linda Hazzard was born Linda Laura Burfield, the oldest of 7 siblings, in Carver, Minnesota on December 18, 1867. Her childhood was fairly unremarkable, and at the age of about 18 or 20, she married Irwin Alonzo Perry. Around this time, Linda took an interest in the medical profession. However, she did not gravitate towards traditional medicine, which honestly would have been a challenge for a woman to break into at the time anyway. Rather, she took an interest in alternative medicine practices. Specifically, she began marketing herself as a fasting specialist. She believed that all disease was caused by food, namely too much of it. She was particularly inspired by Edward Hooker Dewey, MD, a well-known proponent of fasting. Dewey was a graduate of the College of Medicine and Surgery of the University of Michigan, who did actually obtain a medical degree. He also served as an assistant surgeon in the U.S. Army. I'm just going to briefly quote Wikipedia on Dr. Dewey, as I think it sums up his beliefs pretty concisely. Wikipedia says, Dewey argued for people to completely abstain from breakfast and only consume 2 meals per day. He attributed all disease and physiological problems to excessive eating. Now, some of you who are more holistically minded may find yourself thinking, well, he's not entirely wrong. But as I go on, you'll find that Dr. Dewey is, in fact, quite wrong. Quoting again, he advocated long fast and believed that abstinence from food could cure insanity and mental disorders. Dewey was a Protestant and affirmed harmony of his no breakfast plan with the Christian gospel. There were other supporters of Dewey's ideas, but overall, he and his theories were not accepted by medical experts. The British Medical Journal described Dewey as not an accurate or careful writer, noting medical errors in his book. It went on to say that nothing about fasting could be considered a cure-all in the way Dewey described, and that his claims were not supported by solid evidence and should be considered a, quote, foolish delusion. It was broadly agreed upon in the medical field that Dewey took the principles of fasting to an irrational extreme. Despite this, Linda agreed that fasting was where it was at for all things health-related. She developed her own fasting protocol that she said was a panacea for all manner of illnesses, ridding the body of toxins that caused imbalances in the body. She said all disease was caused by impure blood brought on by impaired digestion, and that her method could cure anything from toothache to tuberculosis. In 1898, Linda decided her husband and the 2 children they'd had together were holding her back, and she left them to go pursue her career in Minneapolis. By 1902, her divorce was finalized, and despite having no medical degree, Linda had started treating patients. At this early point in her career, though, there was already something in the water when it came to Dr. Linda and her fasting cure. One of her patients had died, and that in itself is not really a cause for alarm. People who are sick seek medical treatment, and not all of them are going to get better. But the coroner determined that the cause of death for this patient was starvation. What's more, the valuables belonging to the patient were missing. When questioned on the matter, Linda was evasive. The coroner tried to report the crime, but in the end, she could not be held accountable as she wasn't actually licensed to practice medicine. In 1903, Linda met and married Samuel Christman Hazzard. Sam Hazzard is kind of a deadbeat. He was a West Point graduate that squandered what could have been a promising military career by misappropriating Army funds and had a reputation for being a drunk, a lecher, and a swindler. He had also been married twice before, and at the time he met Linda, he was actually still married. None of that bothered Linda, apparently, though, and they married that same year. When his father-in-law found out that Samuel had walked out on his daughter, though, and was already married again without a divorce, he had bigamy charges pressed against him. The trial caused quite a stir in Minneapolis at the time, and eventually Samuel Hazzard was indeed found guilty of bigamy and sentenced to 2 years in prison. When he got out in 1906, he took up with Linda again, and the couple set out for Washington State in search of a fresh start. Now, at some point, not because of Linda Hazzard in particular, but for a lot of reasons, the U.S. realized that they needed to start certifying doctors in some way. And they came up with some laws that said you can only be a doctor if you've done the proper schooling and training and obtained a medical degree. But there were many professionals who had been practicing medicine for quite a while that had gained their knowledge through apprenticeships or some less formalized educational program and had been operating very successful, ethical, and helpful practices for some time. What's more, lawmakers had to codify which disciplines were medicine and which were snake oil, essentially. This created a gray area that allowed many alternative medicine practitioners, like Linda Hazzard, to call themselves doctors. So, when Linda set up shop in Seattle, she called herself Dr. Hazzard and opened a practice in the town of Olalla in Kitsap County that she named Wilderness Heights. At first, locals embraced her and her new ideas, but opinions started to shift once news spread of her brutal treatments. Patients were put up in Seattle hotels or in cabins on her Olalla property. They fasted for days, weeks, and sometimes months and were only given very light liquid diets consisting of tomato juice, asparagus juice, and sometimes an orange. The treatment also included enemas that lasted for hours and massage administered by Dr. Hazzard herself, where she forcibly struck patients on their backs and forehead over and over again while screaming, "Eliminate, eliminate," in their faces. One man, Earl Edward Erdman, a civil engineer with the city of Seattle, signed up for Dr. Hazzard's fasting cure and documented his daily experience there. On February 1st of 1910, he wrote, "Saw Dr. Hazzard and began treatment this date. No breakfast, mashed soup dinner, mashed soup supper." The entries go on. February 5th through 7th, 1 orange breakfast, mashed soup dinner, mashed soup supper. By February 14th, Ed documented the nourishment had tapered even further and he had only been given, quote, 1 cup of strained tomato broth at 6 p.m. Over the next 10 days, he complained of stomach pain, headaches, dizziness, sleeplessness, and yellow eyes streaked with red. On February 24th, he wrote, slept better Wednesday night, kind of a frontal headache in the a.m., ate 2 small oranges 10 a.m., ate 1.5 cups hot tomato soup at 6 p.m. Heart hit up to 95 minute and sweat considerable. Erdman died on March 28, 1910 in the Seattle General Hospital of starvation. I wanted to share Erdman's story with you to give a glimpse of what life under Dr. Hazzard's care was like. But Erdman in 1910 was by no means the first to die at Starvation Heights, as the locals had come to call it. Victims had been piling up since 1908. One of the earliest victims was Daisy Maud Haglund. After a 50-day fast directed by Dr. Hazzard, she died on February 26, 1908 at the age of 38, leaving behind a 3-year-old boy. Haglund's husband, though, stood by Dr. Hazzard's treatment plan and continued to take his 3-year-old little son to see Dr. Hazzard even after his wife's death. The little boy, whose name was Ivar, did survive, though, and grew up to found the seafood restaurant chain Ivar's, which is still going strong in the Pacific Northwest today. Many others were not so lucky, though. In 1908, patients Ida Wilcox and Blanche B. Tyndall lost their lives while undergoing Dr. Hazzard's treatment. In 1909, Viola Heaton died. Then, Maud Whitney in 1910. In 1911, lawyer Frank Souther lost his life to Dr. Hazzard's fasting cure. And if by this point you're screaming for someone to stop her, I am right there with you. In 1911, Lewis Ellsworth Rader, a former legislator and magazine publisher, was found wasting away at a Seattle hotel being treated by Dr. Hazzard. Health inspectors tried to step in and take him out of there for his own good, but he wouldn't go. Rader believed this was all a part of Dr. Hazzard's treatment plan and that if he saw it through, he would turn the corner and become well again. After that, Dr. Hazzard had Rader move to a secret location where his friends could not try and influence him. In the end, the 5'11" man died weighing less than 100 pounds. Autopsy report after autopsy report listed starvation as the cause of death for Dr. Hazzard's patients. But as Hazzard was licensed as a doctor and patients were willing participants, there was little the health department could do. Now, while researching the story, I did ask myself the question, is she doing this on purpose? I thought maybe there was a chance that she was just a really, really bad doctor. I mean, a lot of really good Victorian-era doctors administered some really bad treatments by today's standards to their patients. So maybe she just didn't know. Maybe she actually thought she was helping, and those who died were just too far gone already to be helped by her guaranteed fasting cure. However, in 1910, a man by the name of Ivan Flux entered into Dr. Hazzard's care. Flux was an Englishman who had come to America to buy a ranch and had succeeded in acquiring valuable tracts of land in the U.S. and Canada. Somehow, though, during his treatment, Dr. Hazzard had herself appointed as the administrator to his estate. When Flux died under Dr. Hazzard's care in February of 1911, his family was shocked to find that he had only $70 left to his name. Before that, there was 26-year-old Eugene Stanley Wakelin. Wakelin was the son of a British lord whose decomposing body was found on Hazzard's property awaiting burial. He had died, she said, by suicide from a gunshot to the head. Hazzard had wired Wakelin's lawyer asking for money to pay for his mortuary services, only to find out he had none. The British Vice Consul in Tacoma, Washington, suspected Wakelin had actually been shot by the Hazards so they could cash in on his wealth. Their plan hadn't worked out, obviously, and now they just had a body on their hands. The British Vice Consul started to put pressure on Kitsap County to do something about Linda Hazzard, but the county said they couldn't afford it. In 1911, wealthy British sisters in their early 30s, Claire and Dorothea Williamson, were visiting Victoria, British Columbia. The sisters embraced a number of alternative medicine treatments, including not eating meat or wearing corsets, to treat a number of minor ailments they felt they suffered from. Their family described them as hypochondriacs and were frankly annoyed with their interest in experimental health treatments. Which is why, when the sisters decided to undergo Dr. Hazzard's fasting treatment, they didn't tell a single soul where they were going. They visited Dr. Hazzard, who told them the sanitarium was under construction, but she could put them up at the Buena Vista Apartments in Seattle and begin what she called the most beautiful treatment there. She assigned a nurse to look after them, and this is the first time in researching the story where it occurred to me she had employees. So it wasn't just Linda Hazzard acting alone, there was a whole slew of people who witnessed these things. She had a whole staff, plus her dirtbag husband, participating in repeatedly starving people to death. The sisters began their treatment in February of that year, where they were given only thin vegetable broth as nourishment and endured hours' worth of Dr. Hazzard's enema and brutal massage routine. As they grew weaker, Dr. Hazzard also inquired about their finances and valuables and if she could help keep them safe for them. And the sisters did indeed hand over their diamond jewelry and real estate deeds that Dr. Hazzard agreed to store in her personal safe. By April, the sisters were painfully emaciated and delirious. Dr. Hazzard moved them out of the apartment and isolated them on her Wilderness Heights property in Olalla. Right before she whisked them off, though, Dr. Hazzard's private attorney got Claire to shakily sign a codicil to her will that said in the event of her death, her body would be cremated under the supervision of Dr. Hazzard, and she wanted a monthly stipend of 25 pounds of sterling silver per year left to Dr. Hazzard's institute. Claire was in no state to be making those types of decisions. After the transfer to Olalla, the sisters were under the watch of Dr. Hazzard and her staff at all times. They were too weak to leave of their own accord, and any letters they tried to send out were closely monitored. To say the Williamson sisters were in grave danger is an understatement. On April 30th, though, about 2 months after the sisters embarked on Dr. Hazzard's fasting cure, their childhood nanny, Margaret Conway, received a cryptic telegram from the sisters summoning her to visit them in Olalla. There is no record of what was in the telegram exactly, but whatever it was, Conway found it so bizarre and alarming that she immediately set sail all the way from Sydney, Australia to Seattle. Now, I'm sure the Hazzards were furious when they found out she was coming, but to bar her from seeing the Williamson sisters would only cause Conway to ring the alarms and send stronger enforcers after them. So, after a week's journey, Conway arrived in Seattle on June 1st and was met upon her arrival by Dr. Hazzard's husband, Samuel. He took her not to see Dorothea and Claire, but straight to Dr. Hazzard's office. That's when Dr. Hazzard broke the news to Conway that Claire had recently died and Dorothea was now insane. Dr. Hazzard said it was not her treatment that had killed Claire. Rather, a course of medication Claire had been given in her childhood had shrunk her internal organs, causing her eventual death from cirrhosis of the liver. The meeting with Dr. Hazzard got even more bizarre when they brought Conway to the mortuary to view the embalmed body of Claire Williamson. Conway prepared herself to view the body of the little girl she cared for once upon a time, now grown up but lifeless, only to find that the person they showed her was not Claire. Dr. Hazzard insisted it indeed was, to which Conway said, "Enough is enough, take me to see Dorothea." Dr. Hazzard complied, but reminded her that the toxins being purged during the treatment were at an all-time high right now and affecting her mind. Plus, the death of her sister might have very well put her into a state that she may not recover from. Conway was horrified to discover that Dorothea was being kept in nothing more than a wooden shack, emaciated to the point that she resembled a living skeleton. Upon the reunion, Dorothea immediately begged to be taken away from there. Conway left, assuring her that she'd return with help. But when Conway came to visit Dorothea the next day, she retracted her previous statements and insisted that Dr. Hazzard's cure was indeed doing her a world of good. At a loss, Conway tried to at least sneak a little rice or flour into the sad, watered-down tomato broth they were giving her. During one visit, there was a 4th of July celebration scheduled, and patients who were usually isolated from one another were allowed to gather. During this gathering, 2 other patients approached Conway and begged her to please help them get out of there. Conway spoke to Dr. Hazzard on multiple occasions regarding the release of Dorothea. During one of these meetings, Conway noticed that Dr. Hazzard was wearing some of Claire's clothes. She also learned that Dr. Hazzard had been appointed the executor of Claire's estate, and that Dorothea had signed over her power of attorney to Samuel Hazzard and had listed Dr. Hazzard as her legal guardian. So, no, Dr. Hazzard said, Dorothea was not free to go. Now, remember that incoming and outgoing communications were closely monitored, so Conway had to sneak off the Wilderness Heights property to cable a message to the girl's uncle in Portland, Oregon for help. Meanwhile, Dorothea's weight had dropped to only 60 pounds. Every minute spent trying to negotiate Dorothea's release could literally mean life or death. Her uncle did arrive with haste, but Dr. Hazzard would not release her unless her $2,000 bill was covered in full. That's about $65,000 in today's money. She was essentially holding Dorothea for ransom. Her uncle was able to negotiate a lower ransom, and they did leave with Dorothea, who was rushed to the nearest hospital for treatment. Dorothea did slowly begin to recover, but she was not going to continue to let Dr. Hazzard get away with murder and decided to fund the prosecution for the British Vice Consul to finally go after Dr. Linda Hazzard. Linda Hazzard was arrested for the murder of Claire Williamson in August of 1911. The Tacoma Daily News headline read, "Officials expect to expose starvation atrocities. Dr. Hazzard depicted as fiend." Dr. Hazzard responded that all of these male doctors were just jealous of a successful female in their field who managed to cure people with alternative therapies versus traditional medicine. She confidently stated, "I intend to get on the stand and show up that bunch. They've been playing checkers, but it's my move. I'll show them a thing or two when I get on the stand." To which her lawyer said, "Let's maybe keep you off the stand." Which they did, but as surprising as it may seem to us, there was no shortage of witnesses singing Dr. Hazzard's praises, including her staff and former patients. These glowing references were not enough to counter damning medical testimony, though, plus an obvious paper trail documenting patients' decline and eventual takeover of assets by the Hazzards. Dorothea Williamson served as the prosecution's star witness. She detailed the following typical day's treatment at Wilderness Heights. 6 a.m., awake and remain in bed. 8 a.m., 1 cup of orange juice. 9 a.m., given a bowl of water in which to wash and left to wash alone, although physically helpless from starving. I was often so weak I either could not or forgot to wash at all. 11 a.m., taken to the bathroom in a bare, rough board shack with couch and oil stove and given hot water enemas until still weaker. Lie down on couch. 1 p.m., 1 cup of broth. Sometimes this was very weak broth from potatoes or other vegetables. Sometimes we were given asparagus water or 6 asparagus tips. 6 p.m., 1 cup of broth. This was enough to convince a jury that Linda Hazzard was guilty. The jury, however, came back with a verdict of manslaughter death of Claire Williamson. The press theorized that the only reason she received a verdict of manslaughter and not murder was because she was a woman. Murder often carried a penalty of death, and jurors, who were all men at this time in history, just did not like imposing the death penalty on a woman. She also had her license to practice medicine revoked. While awaiting sentencing, it's alleged that 2 more of Linda Hazzard's patients died. Eventually, she was sentenced to 2 to 20 years at the state penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington. After serving 2 years, on December 26, 1915, she received a full pardon from Governor Ernest Lister. Why, Lister? Why did you do that? Well, the pushback from the public against her conviction had actually been pretty significant. Her lockup was viewed by many as a great loss to the medical community. So Lister arranged it as a condition of the pardon that she leave the U.S., and she was free to go. She and her husband then moved to New Zealand, where, as one source summarizes, she operated under the titles of physician, dietitian, and osteopath, published another book, and made a lot of money. In 1920, though, she returned to Olalla, Washington, with plans to bring her true vision for Wilderness Heights to life. Because she had no medical license, though, she marketed the practice as a school for health. And she went right back on to starving people to death and taking their money under the guise of treatment. In 1935, though, the sanitarium burnt down and she did not rebuild. In 1938, in her early 70s now, Linda Hazzard attempted to follow her own fasting protocol, and she died. That's right, she starved herself to death. All in, it's agreed that she killed at least a dozen patients via starvation. Some say she may have had as many as 40 victims. All that stands today of Starvation Heights is a 70-foot tall concrete tower and the ruins of the building's foundation. So tell me what you think about Dr. Hazzard. I mean, she was a crook, right? But do you think she actually believed in this fasting cure she was peddling? I mean, in the end, she died from a dose of her own medicine. If you're listening on Spotify, you can comment on the episode there, or if you head over to Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at A Good Night for a Murder, you can let me know what you think there as well. I've also posted some photos of Linda Hazzard, her sanitarium, and more. You can also see the photos and source links for this episode on the episode blog on my website at agoodnightforamurder.com. The bonus content for Patreon members for this episode is actually a little bit about the bigamy scandal her husband caused, as well as some more shocking Victorian-era scandals. Listen through the outro music to hear a short preview of this Patreon bonus content. To subscribe to Patreon and learn more about the podcast, you can visit agoodnightforamurder.com. Also, follow me on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at A Good Night for a Murder. Please rate and review and share with friends. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again soon. And to accompany episode 49 about starvation doctor Linda Hazzard, I'm going to tell you about 5 more Victorian scandals that had society clutching their pearls, including that of Dr. Hazzard's bigamist husband. In this month's regular episode about Linda Hazzard, we talked about her piece of work husband, Samuel Chrisman Hazzard, and how Linda was already wife number 3 for him. In fact, he and Linda's marriage resulted in a bigamy trial that was big news in the Minneapolis area for quite some time. However, this proved to be just the tip of the iceberg in Sam Hazzard's bigamy scandal. The woman Samuel was married to while he met Linda was named Viva Estella Fitzpatrick. And it turns out Samuel was actually Viva's 3rd husband. It looks like she'd been divorced twice already and was actually cohabitating with Samuel as his common-law wife. At the time, Samuel had been going by the last name of Hargrave because, remember, Samuel himself is kind of a low-life scam artist. Like we talked about in the regular episode, he had a reputation for being a, quote, drunk lecher and swindler who had squandered what could have been a successful military career when he was found to have misappropriated U.S. Army funds. In 1902, Samuel up and left Viva to pursue a relationship with Linda. Viva's father, Joseph Fitzpatrick, was a well-connected lawyer and businessman, and when he heard what Samuel Hargrave/Hazzard had done to his daughter, he had Samuel prosecuted for bigamy, which was and is illegal in all 50 U.S. states. Samuel, as we know, was found guilty and served 2 years in prison. Viva, though, found it in herself to forgive Samuel and actually supported him emotionally and financially throughout his incarceration. When he was released, though, he picked back up with Linda, and the rest is history. Now, I don't know what her circumstances were, but after Samuel, Viva was married 2 more times. It looks like she may have also divorced husband number 4, but been widowed by husband number 5. Samuel Hazzard's bigamy scandal caused quite a stir for being just a regular person, so you can imagine the drama that unfolded when celebrities found themselves on the front page. One of the biggest celebrity scandals during the Victorian era was the murder of actor William Terrace. Terrace was an English actor who was a notable Shakespearean performer, but possibly most famous for his, quote, swashbuckling hero roles such as Robin Hood, amongst other drama and comedy roles. By the 1890s, Terrace had made the acquaintance of another actor, Richard Archer Prince. Prince did win a number of small named roles in London theaters, but he had a rather inflated opinion of himself and would take it badly when he got passed over for roles. Terrace did help the younger Prince out when he could by placing him in productions he wasn't involved with, but Prince was hard to employ. He regularly struggled with alcohol abuse and mental health. An incident occurred between Terrace and Prince during a run of a play called The Harbor Lights, where Terrace took offense to something Prince said about him, so he had him fired. After this, though, Terrace still supported Prince monetarily via the Actors Benevolent Fund and still recommended him for acting jobs. Over a 2-year period between May 1895 and July 1897, Prince floated between acting and laborer jobs, but by the end of 1897, Prince was destitute and desperate for work. On December 13th, 1897, he tried to gain free admission to the Vaudeville Theater with a pass from the Adelphi Theater. Turns out he wasn't just in the wrong place, the pass had been revoked at the Adelphi Theater and was obviously not valid at the Vaudeville Theater either. Prince had to be forcibly removed from the theater that night, causing quite a scene. He caused another scene the next night at the Adelphi Theater, where he had been to Terrace's dressing room, and the two were heard arguing. Prince believed that Terrace had had him blacklisted from getting work. A day and a half later, on December 16, 1897, Prince made a